Okay. Okay, hopefully welcome to everybody who has joined us today for the second in our series of behaviour webinars with Dr. Katrin. It's lovely to have people back and good to know that lots of people were viewing our last one, which was the building blocks of canine behaviour. Today we're focusing more on our feline companions, and we have Dr. Katrin joining us once again as the founder and owner of the German veterinary clinic in Abu Dhabi. She has worked in the UAE for a number of years, and prior to this worked in general and referral practice in the UK, where she received the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons certificate in veterinary anaesthesia and pain relief, as well as completing a doctorate thesis in animal behaviour. And Dr. Katrin is currently in the midst of a 4-year residency in veterinary behaviour medicine. So the German Veterinary Clinic in Abu Dhabi is the first ISFM, or International Cat Care, gold standard cat-friendly clinic in the Middle East, as well as the first clinic in the region to be enrolled in the fear-free certification program. And of course, we know Dr. Katrin very well from Pets and Vets on Dubai Eye, where she regularly contributes and offers advice and support on all aspects of pet care, but obviously frequently behaviour. And we get so many questions in from our cat and dog owners that I think hopefully this one will be very popular as well. Today we are focusing on feline behaviour, as we have mentioned, and I will hand you over without further delay to Dr. Katrin. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and hello to everybody. It's such a pleasure to be back again this afternoon, and I am looking forward to spending the next hour chatting about one of my favourite topics, which is cats, and in particular feline behaviour. So I've titled this webinar "The World of Cats" because I think it's always, such a fascinating idea, or such a great way to think about cats, as if we try and see the world from their perspective and what is actually important to cats, what's behaviorally important, what their needs are, what their social systems are like. So I want to kind of introduce you to the world of cats a little bit further over the next hour. So just to give you an overview, what I'm going to be talking about is we're going to do a little bit about cats to start off with, which is going to be a little bit about ancestry, domestication, social groups, territories, all that sort of thing. We're then going to move on to common behavior problems in cats and things that I in particular see frequently here in the UAE. We're then going to talk about what is a healthy feline environment, and what can we do, what do we need to do to provide a healthy feline environment for our cats. And then finally, we're going to chat about other ways in which we can help cats to live more easily with us as human companions and with other cats as well. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning and let's have a little look at the ancestor of the domestic cat. And this is a cat called the African wildcat, or Felis sylvestris libica. And we think that this African wildcat is the ancestor to our modern pet cat, so our domesticated cat. And what's really interesting about this African wildcat is that it is the ultimate solitary hunter. So it lives pretty much on its own. It hunts on its own, so it doesn't need other cats to hunt. It doesn't hunt in a pack. It eats on its own, and it really spends very much of its life on its own, apart from obviously when it wants to procreate, and then it goes out to seek a mate, and then continues living a relatively solitary lifestyle. Another thing that's really interesting about the African wildcat is this ability, or this tendency, to monitor its environment from high perches. And if we think about our domestic cat and their sort of inclination and tendency to like to be up high and to sort of monitor their surroundings from a high place, we can see where that sort of comes into play. So how did this very solitary cat turn into our modern day domesticated cat, and why did it start to move closer both to other cats as well as to people? And we think that happened as human settlements started to increase, and with human settlements came grain stores, and where there were grain stores there were lots of mice, so a great food source. So some of these African wildcats started to break away from their solitary existence and started to move towards human settlements because there were convenient and easy food sources there. And that's how we started to get the increased proximity to humans and to other cats. And so over time, the African wildcat turned into our modern day domestic cat, also known as Felis sylvestris catus. And those are the cats that we know that inhabit our homes, that live with us, and that commonly share our lives. I think one of the really important things to note is that the cat was probably the last of our domestic species to be domesticated. So all of the other species, horses, farm animals, cows, sheep, goats, and so on, we think were all domesticated much, much earlier. And if we compare, for example, the dog and the cat, so we think the cat was domesticated around 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, whereas the dog was domesticated 20 to 40,000 years ago. So really a big, big difference. And, you know, I think that's really important to note when we think about, you know, how domesticated really are our pet cats. And that brings me on to my next slide, and that is, so there's a big discussion still very much in the feline world about, are cats really truly domesticated? Because if we have a look at this picture here on the right hand side, we can see this huge spectrum of essentially domestic cats, or the breed domestic cats. But on the left hand side of the spectrum, we have cats that are essentially living wild, feral cats who really can live completely without human intervention. Oftentimes are actually fearful of humans. They don't need humans in order to survive. They can hunt for the food themselves. They don't need people for shelter or comfort or safety or anything like that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, on the right side of the spectrum, we have our true sort of household cats who live in our homes, sleep in our beds, who are fed by us, and who rely on us very much for safety, comfort, and supplying them with their needs to survive. And then we have everything in between. So you have the two extremes, but obviously you have all the other parts on this spectrum. And you know, some cats may be more or less inclined to live in close proximity to humans. And I think if we think about the UAE cat population, you know, this definitely strikes a chord and makes sense to us, because we have so many cats that do essentially live a feral lifestyle and live a lifestyle that's very much separated from humans. And of course, if we try to bring those cats into our homes, that may well cause problems. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a think about social relationships. So we just spoke about, you know, that certainly the ancestor of our domestic cat as being a very solitary species. So that probably means that they're also not very good at forming social relationships, both with other cats, so within the same species, but also with other species and also with humans. And this has a couple of reasons. Number one being, as I mentioned earlier, the cat being this solitary hunter. So cats eat around 10 to 12 small meals per day, and each of those small meals will be either a mouse or a bird or a lizard or a small rodent, something like that, and will probably only be enough to sate one single cat. So if you thought that cat went out and hunted a mouse and then he had to share it with all of the rest of his mates or the rest of his gang that hunted with him, there probably wouldn't be a lot left for him. So cats do still tend to be solitary hunters, and if they hunt alone, they also eat alone a lot of the time. And so there is still a very sort of ingrained, still solitary element to their being. The other thing that's really unique and quite special about cats is they're not just predators or hunters, but they're also prey species. So they also get hunted. And as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side there, you can see a bird of prey that's actually caught and picked up a cat as its own meal. And again, if cats were to live in a large group with lots of other cats, it would probably be much easier for that bird of prey to find and pick up a cat than if they kept themselves to themselves and were quite solitary. So we've got a predisposition for cats not to want to form great social relationships with other cats because they don't need it for their survival, and it might actually hinder their survival. And so that poses the question then, well, when do cats form groups? And we have a couple of very sort of distinct scenarios, one of them being these maternally related females. So there'll be mothers and sisters and grandmas and aunties, all of whom form social groups with each other, so with other related females. And that usually has quite a distinct purpose, which is to help take care of each other's kittens. You know, the mother cat perhaps stays with the kittens, the auntie goes out and hunts for some food to bring back to feed the kittens. So we have this sort of social group that's a very matrilineal, female related group of cats, and it serves a purpose. I think that's always the important thing to think about is, you know, why do cats do this? Well, because it serves a purpose, and that is to help raise their offspring. Now, there are two other sort of scenarios when cats would form groups. One would be cat colonies, and that's usually because there is availability of food and there's a predictability. So, you know, if you have cat colonies, for example, that are fed by people, you know, you have that predictability of food, or for example, where cats congregate, let's say, close to the ports, where there are lots of fish. Again, there's availability and predictability of a food source. Can also be formed around shelter sites or nesting sites, although these are less common. It's more the food availability and the food predictability that causes cats to live in a group and have that purpose of being in a group in those areas. And then finally, we have the wonderful multi-cat households, which are artificially formed by us. So they're cat groups that we impose on our cats, if you like. So we will often bring completely unrelated, completely strange to each other cats into one household that may or may not be large enough for the number of cats that are in there. And oftentimes we expect those cats to live with each other in harmony, and to all get on and to be part of our family unit. So those are really the three sort of common scenarios that cats would either choose or not choose to live in groups. So that's cat to cat sociability, but what about cat human sociability? And what about cat to other species? So dog, for example, sociability. And that's a really interesting topic, and a lot of it is to do with genetics. So there may be a genetic component to that. And interestingly enough, that's often predisposed by the father. So if the father's genetics are predictive for, an open, friendly, confident, bold type of cat personality, then those cats may well find it easier to form human social relationships. But the really important part is this socialization period. So for those of you who tuned into the Canine webinar, we have a socialization period for dogs, which is age about 3 to 12 weeks. And in cats, that socialization period is slightly earlier. It's about 2 to 9 weeks of age. And it's that socialization period that's really predictive for how well cats may be able to form social relationships with people. So if they have very positive, regulated contact with people in that socialization period, then they're probably going to be much more likely to be tolerant, accepting, and even enjoy human social relationships going forward. If no such contact occurs, then it's possible that that kitten only learns to form relationships with other cats, and it's likely that the social interactions with people are less strong or are less likely. And the same goes for dogs. And there are some really interesting studies actually that almost sort of, it's almost like a recipe for how often a kitten should be handled, at what frequency, and for how long, and what kind of exposure that are going to be most conducive to having a cat that's able to live in homes and form human social relationships. And I think that would be something that would be really great. We try to do it very much if we get a very young kitten brought into our clinic that we would like to see if we can find a home for. We have almost a sort of a daily treatment schedule, which is, human interaction. Pick the kitten up for 2 minutes, 5 times a day, play with it, or, feed it treats to start creating those positive interactions. Okay, let's talk a little bit about space, home ranges, territories, that kind of thing, because I think that's also a very important thing to think about when we think about behavior problems and why they might occur. So a home range is basically the entirety of the space or an area that a cat occupies. And these home ranges can be huge, especially for unneutered male cats. So up to 10 square kilometers for unneutered male cats. So they'll go out and they will roam these large distances looking for mates usually, or hunting, looking for food sources, that kind of thing. But the home range of a pet cat is still 20,000 to 50,000 square meters, so still a really, really large area. And so, again, if we start to think about the kind of environments that we might ask our pet cats to live in, that might be quite challenging for some, especially if they're male cats or if they're the kind of cats to whom those home ranges or expansive spaces are really important. And then we talk about the territory, and that can be, so we've got the territory and the core territory. So the territory basically is an area that the cat will defend actively. So that's one of its definitions, and is usually held exclusively by an individual or a group. It's often an area that, a cat will return to for its sort of core needs, which is eating, sleeping, resting, all that kind of thing. And then the core territory is usually a sheltered and safe area, again, where eating, sleeping, rest, and or play may take place. And I think it's really important when we think about territories, and especially that aspect of it's the area that's actively defended. So if we have a number of cats that are living, let's say, in a lovely sort of community area, where we have lots of beautiful villas with gardens that kind of back onto each other, that depending on the size of that territory, we may have multiple cats invading the same territories. And that's where the fighting comes in, because each of those cats feels the need to actively defend its territory, and they may well overlap, or that territory may well overlap with another cat's territory. So just something to think about a little bit, again, when we're starting to think about behavior problems. How do they arise? Why do cats fight with each other? Why do stray cats fight? Why do stray cats? All that kind of thing. So really an important aspect of feline behavior to be thinking about. Okay, so talking a little bit more about the territory, as I just mentioned, it's an area that's actively defended. And that's where offensive or even hostile or aggressive or overt behaviors are shown towards intruders. It can be the cat's immediate living area where it rests and shelters, may center around food, and the toileting areas are usually on the periphery. And I want you to have a think about a cat that may live in an apartment, perhaps with 1 or 2 other cats, and how that sort of apartment space that maybe doesn't have a garden or doesn't have a balcony, but how though all of those cats that live in that apartment might perceive the whole idea of territory. The fact that they may actively need to defend it to each other may be cause for intercat aggression in those sort of environments. If you think about the toileting areas at the periphery, and scent communication and all the sort of things that go with that, then we can start to sort of get a bit of an idea as to why some of those environments might not be ideal for multiple cats, and why we might see some of the more common behavior problems. Okay, so I just want to touch on this because this is pretty important. So again, we're still focusing on the territory. So how does a cat communicate to another cat or signal to another cat that this is its territory? And cats do that by what we call marking their territory. And they do that with a number of chemical communication signals. So the first one is urine spraying or urine marking, which many of us may be familiar with. So if you have a look at the cat in the bottom right hand corner there that has its tail upright and it's kind of spraying out horizontally against a vertical surface. So that is a typical picture of urine marking or urine spraying. And again, some of you or may see this in conjunction with behavior problems, this marking of the territory around the perimeter. The second thing can be facial pheromones. So if you have a look at the cat that's on the bottom left-hand side, so when cats rub their faces onto objects like this, and they're usually corners of bits of furniture, and they're often in corridors or areas that the cats pass through quite frequently, and often sort of leaves a kind of reddish brownish deposit. So that's a way of marking the territory with the facial pheromones. The third way of chemical communication or pheromone communication is through interdigital pheromones. So that's what the cat deposits in an area when it scratches. So when a cat scratches up against a vertical surface, it's leaving both a visual mark that's made by its claws, so those obvious kind of visual longwise strips from the claws, but also the pheromones from in between the toes that leave a communication signal for any other cat that may come into that territory. And basically all of these communication signals, whether it's urine marking or facial pheromones or through interdigital pheromones, they all communicate something to another cat without those two cats having to physically meet. So that's the design of it, is that each cat can mark out its territory and signal to the next cat, oh, this is where my boundary ends, this is my territory. And then the other cat can choose to come in and fight if it feels that that's a good idea, or it says, oh, no, that's fine, that's your territory, this is my territory. And they continuously keep reinforcing those boundaries through the chemical communication signals. Middening is the final one. It's much more rare. So that's deposits of feces around the boundaries of a territory. So leaving basically fecal deposits, and that's the fourth way of marking the territory. But again, if we're thinking about feline behavior problems, urine marking, one of the most common behavior problems I see, and that's that cat trying to consistently mark its territory or communicate to the other cats that might be in the household, hey, this is my territory, why are you still here? This is my territory, why are you still here? And that's where we might get these some of the behavior problems that we see in our domestic settings. Okay, so moving on to behavior problems, and I really want to just kind of focus on these two because these are by far the most common behavior problems that I see in my behavior practice, certainly. And we've just kind of touched a little bit on the backgrounds of them, but I just want to elaborate a little bit further on them because they're both common and they're both very, very complex, and they're both not always easy to treat, to solve, to address. And to sort of make positive steps on because of the reasons that I've just sort of explained. So probably my number one most common behavior problem in cats would be toileting problems, marking problems, also known as house soiling. Some people call it inappropriate urination or peeing outside the litter box, or peeing up against certain objects or surfaces in the home. Now, this is a hugely complex topic and it has many, many differential diagnoses. So it has many different causes that, you know, can be contributing to the problem. And one of the biggest causes may be medical. And it's really important that if your cat is urinating outside of the litter box, or, you know, showing any of these behaviors of house soiling, that you absolutely must get a medical evaluation initially. So we could be dealing with cystitis, which is an inflammation of the bladder, also known as feline idiopathic cystitis. We could be dealing with a disease that's causing the cat to produce more urine, such as diabetes or kidney disease. And that in turn could be causing the cat to urinate more frequently and maybe also outside of the litter box. If we're dealing with pain, for example, if we're thinking about maybe an older cat, if the cat's not comfortable getting into the litter box or out of the litter box, or if perhaps the litter box is too small for the cat to turn around comfortably and do its digging and scratching behaviors, then it may choose to urinate and or defecate outside of the litter box. So we have to make sure that we address possible medical underlying causes first. And then the other two are more behavioral. So we have social or environmental problems. Social can be, you know, multiple cats in a household, but could also be, you know, the young toddler who every time the cat uses the litter box, you know, runs around and bangs on the lid of the litter box if it's a covered litter box. So those social relationships could be a problem for that cat and may cause it to seek out a different place to eliminate because it doesn't feel safe urinating in the litter box. Environmental often has to do with the litter boxes themselves. So if there are not enough litter boxes in the home, if the litter boxes are dirty, if they're not big enough, if, for example, the litter is scented, which can be very aversive to some cats, or if there are litter liners in the bottom of the litter tray, which can also be aversive. Those kinds of things can also cause the cat to not want to use the litter box anymore and instead look for a more suitable place to eliminate. And then obviously we have urine marking, which I just addressed a little bit. Now, the thing about urine marking, as we've just spoken about, it's a normal behavior for cats. It's a normal communication behavior for cats. It may be extremely unwanted, it may be extremely annoying, but it is essentially the cat putting a chemical communication piece in the environment. And often we have to think about, well, what's not right about this cat's environment, or what's not right about the social relationships within this environment that are causing this cat to need to urine mark. And so there was an interesting piece of research done in 2001 by a group of behaviorists that had a look at the likelihood of urine spraying in multi-cat households. And they found that the likelihood of urine spraying increases in direct proportion to the number of cats in the household, and to actually 100% if there are 10 or more cats in the household. So according to this study, it's absolutely inevitable that if there are 10 or more cats in the household, you're going to have urine spraying at some point. So I thought that's interesting, because I have seen a number of multi-cat households, not just here in the UAE, around the world, but specifically here in the UAE as well, you know, that do have that many cats, that have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or even more cats. And that's a huge risk factor and a huge predictor for urine spraying in cats. Okay, moving on to my number 2 biggest behavior problem in cats that I see, and that is intercat aggression. So 2 cats fighting with each other. That can happen either if a new cat is introduced into the home, but it can also happen with pre-existing cats, where all of a sudden there's a change in the relationship. That can be due to a specific event. One cat's been to the vet, comes home, all of a sudden it smells like a strange cat, all hell breaks loose, and then that relationship is broken, and it's very difficult oftentimes to re-establish that relationship. So it can be cats within the home, or it can be with stray cats. And again, we spoke about that whole territorial piece earlier. So stray cats coming into a home cat's territory, and then fights ensuing from that, which obviously can be dangerous because of the risk of transmission of diseases such as FIV, but also cat bite abscesses. So they're all behavior problems that can result in very serious medical problems as well. One of the things I often hear people say, or people often communicate to me when I go to their homes and we're talking about an intercat aggression case, is this whole idea of play. So, you know, at first they were playing, and then all of a sudden it turned into something else. And oftentimes what may look to us like play is actually already the beginning of an aggressive event. Play is very, very clearly defined in cats. It's usually silent. It's usually kind of one cat on top, then the other cat on top. There are usually no I said it was silent, sorry, no vocalizations. And oftentimes, and usually there are no signs of negative emotions such as anxiety or fear. So in the two cats in the picture here, for example, you can see the cat on the left-hand side has his ears right back. You can see that kind of backward stance. So those would all be signs of avoidance or fear, anxiety in that moment. So play is pretty different to a lot of other intercat communications. And funnily enough, feline aggression can be very, very what we call covert. So not sort of a cat fight where they're running and chasing after each other, but it can be very sort of passive. And oftentimes one cat staring at another cat, or blocking another cat's path, or blocking another cat's access to a resource like the litter tray or the food bowl or the entry and exit to the garden. That can already be aggressive behavior. So just because it's not loud and chasing and balls of cats and fur flying doesn't mean there's not already an aggressive element to that interaction. So that's that covert versus overt piece. So the covert aggression is very much the passive aggression, the staring and the blocking. And I think that, you know, intercat aggression does have a significant welfare implication, because we usually have one or more aggressor cats. We usually have one or more victim cats. You know, the victim cats can usually suffer very badly. I've seen many cases where the victim cats are so scared by the attacker that they actually urinate or defecate. So we have serious welfare implications for the victim cat, but also the aggressor cat. And we really need to sort of try and stop as much as possible these hostile and aggressive events from happening within the home, or, you know, with stray cats outside of the home. And one of the things in cats is that they're not very good at reconciliation. So once that relationship has been damaged, or once that sort of aggressive event has happened, it's really difficult for those cats to rebuild their relationship. And that's something I've seen time and time again. And even if you do make progress in rebuilding the relationship, all it takes is for one new event, one new aggressive event, and we're right back to square one again. And that whole reconciliation piece comes again from you know, the reason that cats don't have to live in groups to survive. So if you think about other species like horses, for example, they very much need their group dynamic in order to survive, you know, to run away from threats and all that sort of thing. So you'll see reconciliatory behaviors between those species where, you know, they kind of groom each other, and they try and make peace with the other one to keep the harmony within the group. Cats don't necessarily need that, and that's why they're not as good at reconciliation as other species, and that's a real problem if we're trying to address these problems of intercat aggression. So how do we address behavior problems in cats? Well, certainly for me as a veterinary behaviorist, I would do that as I would with any other medical consultation. So I get an extensive history, which is usually in the form of a questionnaire, maybe some videos that the client sends to me. I then do a home visit and we observe the cat or cats in their environment, and we try to sort of start to understand some of the triggers or some of the areas that might be contributing to the behavior. And I then establish a diagnosis, and it's the diagnosis that allows for the treatment plan. Without a diagnosis, we can't implement a treatment plan. You know, we have to have that diagnosis piece. And the treatment plan is usually multifactorial. There's lots of different elements to it. It's really important that we rule out medical causes, as I mentioned earlier. We want to optimize the environment so it's as cat friendly as it can be. We want to modify the cat's behavior. So can we teach it to feel differently about some things, other cats or you know, other triggers or stresses in the environment. And then we have medication, pheromones and supplements that we can help to reduce stress and to help the cat's emotional state or how it's feeling. And then finally, we need, you know, we need regular monitoring. So we need to do follow-up appointments to see whether things are progressing, if they're worsening, and whether we need to change our approach. Okay, so we are going to talk now about how we can create a healthy feline environment. And this is something that is part of every single one of my treatment plans, because the environment is so very important to cats. And a few years ago, the ISFM, so the International Society for Feline Medicine, and the American Association of Feline Practitioners came up with these great guidelines in the form of these 5 pillars of a healthy feline environment. And whenever I look at my behavior cases, or indeed look at my clinic, or you know, anywhere that we are housing, treating, being with cats, we want to make sure that we have these 5 pillars of a healthy feline environment in place. And I'll go through them one by one for you, but yeah, just to give you a couple of sort of visuals of, you know, what we think an enriched feline environment might look like. You know, these are some of the great things that can be done. There's a lot that can be done, whether it's in an apartment or whether it's, you know, with outdoor space as well. But I think, you know, we really need to have a think about what cats need in their environment in order to feel comfortable and safe. And so the first one is indeed provide a safe place. And a safe place can mean many different things. So for example, if you have, you know, aggressive stray cats coming into your garden, that's no longer a safe place. So what can we do to try and prevent those cats from coming into the garden to make it a safe place again, and to reestablish that safety? And, you know, there are a number of things that can perhaps be done to try and sort of protect that space. But if we're thinking about it a little bit more sort of conventionally, a safe place would be anywhere that a cat can retreat to in order to feel safe and comfortable. And I was actually chatting with a client about this the other day, who has a 3-year-old toddler. And as the 3-year-old child becomes more and more active and is wanting to interact more and more with the cat, that's when, you know, having those safe places starts to become really important. And that can be at a height. Remember, our African wildcat like to be at a height and to sort of check its environment from a height. So a safe place at height might be a good thing. But having just like a cardboard box, sometimes like the picture on the top here, or an igloo type bed that the cat can kind of go into and snuggle up and hide away, or even a wardrobe space where they love to be because it's quiet, it's in a bedroom, it's secluded, it may be at height, it's somewhere where the cat can get away and feel safe and feel comfortable. So providing a safe place would be our first pillar. Pillar number 2 is provide multiple and separated key resources. When we speak about resources, we speak about things such as litter trays, food bowls, water bowls, scratch posts, toys, resting areas, sleeping areas. And when we say multiple, the magic number, I'm sure most of us have heard of this, the magic number is number of cats in the household plus one. So if you have 2 cats, you should have 3 litter trays. If you have 3 cats, you should have at least 4 water stations or 4 water bowls, and so on. And that's because we want to create this feeling of abundance and this feeling of choice, so that the cats can go to different areas, hence the separated, so that the litter trays are not all next to each other in the same room, but actually that we have a litter tray on each floor of the house, or perhaps, you know, opposite ends of the house, or different rooms within the house, so that the cats have choice. They have a choice of access. They can easily access one or the other resource if perhaps another cat is using the other or blocking the other. So having resources in plentiful supply and separate locations is really, really important. And there are a couple of things about food and water as well. So we don't want to have food next to water. That's not something that a cat would do naturally. So it would never bring food close to a water source in case that food contaminated that water source. So again, that's why we talk about separated, multiple and separated resources. Point number 3 is provide opportunity for play and predatory behavior. So not only is play something joyful and something that actually improves the quality of a cat's life, but it's also really important to them from a DNA and a behavioral hard wiring kind of perspective. So cats go through the predatory sequence quite automatically. So even cats that are very, very well fed, you know, that we feed, they'll still go through that predatory sequence as if they were hunting something, because that's a behavior pattern that's hardwired into their brains. So we want to make sure that we always give them enough opportunities for that. Now that might be object play, so in form of toys, that might be social play with somebody with toys, that could be a toy that is kind of electrically movable and can be switched on to offer some stimulation, but can also be a hunting feeding toy. So one of the little mice that we saw here on this slide, so these are the Doc and Phoebe mice, which are little mice that have plastic containers in them that you can put dry food into, and the cat has to hunt the mouse and kind of bat it around with its feet in order to get the food out. So we want to provide lots of opportunities and lots of enrichment in terms of play and predatory behavior. Our next pillar is pillar number 4, which is providing positive, consistent and predictable human-cat interactions. Now, many of us know that cats don't love to be touched, and they also don't love to be touched all over their bodies. Cats usually are very comfortable about being petted around their head and neck area. Most cats don't like their extremities touched. Most cats don't like their bellies being touched. And a lot of cats object to sort of their backs and their flanks being touched. So there are a couple of really great sort of simple rules to live by when you're thinking about interacting with cats. The first one is what we call the kitty handshake. And you can see my head nurse, Nora, in the bottom picture there, performing a kitty handshake with one of our cats in our hospital room. And that's basically extend out to the cat as if your finger was another cat's nose, and allowing that cat to come and make contact with your finger. And if he's okay with that interaction, he may rub his face into that finger, and he may allow you to pet his head for a short period of time. So the kitty handshake is something that we always use. It's a mark of respect, and it's a mark of allowing the cat to initiate the contact if it wants to. And it means that we don't force our interactions on the cats. The other thing that we live by a lot is what we call the 3-second rule. So we will interact with a cat for 3 seconds, we'll stop. And if the cat wants to continue the interaction, it will let us know by either rubbing into us or maybe positioning its body against us, and saying it's okay for us to continue the interaction. So I think, you know, that to me is one of really the biggest things of human cat interaction, is allowing the cats the choice as to whether they want to interact with us or not. And I do see cases of petting related aggression, which is where, you know, people stroke cats, stroke cats, stroke cats. The cat tolerates it for so long, and then all of a sudden it doesn't tolerate it anymore, and it becomes frustrated with the interaction, and it may swipe or it may bite. So it's a really easy way to interact with cats is by using some of these very simple rules, the kitty handshake and the 3-second rule. And then finally, we want to think about the cat's sense of smell, and we want to provide an environment that respects the cat's sense of smell. So a cat's sense of smell is probably its most important sense, and it will be able to detect lots of different smells, and it may interpret them as being hostile. So if you're bringing shopping bags in from outside, if you're bringing bicycles in and storing them in your corridor of your apartment, or if you feed stray cats outside, your cat will pick up on those scents that are being brought into its home and into its territory. I had a really interesting case actually of a feline urine marking case, where the cat was really upset and was urine marking the entirety of the apartment. And the owner actually did stall his bicycles in the front entrance to the apartment. As soon as we removed the bikes and we gave the bikes a different place to live, and we made sure that, you know, shoes were taken off outside of the apartment, the urine marking stopped almost immediately, or reduced to almost nothing immediately. So a cat's sense of smell is really, really important. And we'll go on in the next slides to talk a little bit more about pheromones and what else we can do. Okay, so we're moving on to our final piece, and I'm almost out of time, but I think we'll get there, which is other ways that we can help cats. So we just spoke about a cat's, the importance of a cat's sense of smell, and we spoke about pheromones earlier, which is, you know, how cats mark their territory and how they put communication signals in their environment. And one of the things that we spoke about were these feline facial pheromones. So when a cat rubs its face against, you know, objects in the home, and these feline facial pheromones have actually been synthetically recreated and are available as a number of different products. Feliway is the original product, but it's also available from a company called Behaviour, who have produced a pheromone product called Cat Comfort, which is readily available here in the UAE. And these are pheromones that signal to the cat that this is a safe environment. So the cat puts its pheromones there to say, hey, I've been here before, this is my territory, this is safe, I know where I am, I feel comfortable here. And sometimes I explain it as if you're driving in the fog and all of a sudden you see that building that gives you orientation, and finally you kind of know roughly where you are again. Well, that's a little bit what the feline facial pheromones do. They give the cats a sense of security and a sense of safety in their environment. And so these pheromone products are available either as plug-in diffusers, sprays, or the Feliway is available as a wipe that you can use, for example, in cat carriers or other sort of areas in the home. We often advise the Feliway Classic products for new items of furniture coming into the home to kind of mark that piece of furniture as safe. So the Feliway products are extremely, extremely useful. I do know many people who say they've tried them and they've found no difference, but oftentimes they're not being used correctly. So, you know, if you do want some more information on that, please feel free to contact me and I can tell you how to best use these. We have a second pheromone product, which is relatively new. To my knowledge, it currently is only made by the company Siva and is available as Feliway Friends. And that's actually an appeasing pheromone, which is produced by the mother cat when she's nursing her kittens. So it's a pheromone that's produced from the intermammary region and has a gives the kittens a sense of well-being, a sense of safety, a sense of you don't have to worry, you can feel quite comfortable and quite happy in yourself. And we often use this pheromone product when we want to improve social relationships, either between cats or between cats and people. Okay, we have a couple of other really great products. We have the Royal Canin Veterinary Calm Diet, which is a diet that has a couple of really special ingredients. One ingredient is called alpha-casozepine, and the other is called L-tryptophan. Now, L-tryptophan is the precursor for serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that's very important for the brain and helps to regulate normal brain function. The alpha-casozepine is the same ingredient that is also in a product called Zilkine. It's completely natural. It's a milk protein based product. And the milk protein has been shaped in such a way that it binds to some really important receptors in the brain and also helps the animal to feel calmer and less anxious. So those are two great products that we can use, to help our feline patients in times of stress or as a way of helping to address behavior problems. All right, so I want to leave you with some resources. I think I am doing okay for time. I want to leave you with some really great resources and things that can really help all cat owners, cat rescue groups, anybody that has regular dealings with cats. One of them is a book called Decoding Your Cat. And that has been written by a number of members of the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, and has been written for cat owners and gives you a fantastic, really easy to read insight into cat behavior and how we can address certain feline problems. The other resource is, of course, my favorite, icatcare.org. So that is the institution or the organization that does the cat-friendly clinic accreditation scheme and has really sort of forged the way forwards in terms of both feline behavior, but also feline medicine. So that's and you'll find an abundance of resources on iCatCare. And the final one is Fear Free Happy Homes, which is a website that's run by Fear Free, also for pet owners. Has lots and lots of free information on there, so it's free to join up. Has lots and lots of resources around feline behavior, such as this little picture that I've put down here. What does a relaxed cat look like versus what does a stressed cat look like? So you'll get lots of great information from that website as well. And that is my final slide. I want to say thank you very much to my two pussycats. On the left-hand side, we've got Vicky, and on the right-hand side, we have the Squidge. And that is my email address in case anybody wants to get in touch with me directly. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dr. Katrin. That was extremely informative. We do have quite a few questions. I think we have plenty of time to get through those. If you're still good to go,
yeah,
I will crack straight on. The first one is one that often comes up on the radio as well, I would think. When should you be concerned, or when should I be concerned if my cat has a habit of becoming anorexic, so going off their food when going into, say, a cattery, for example, or even when a friend is house sitting, so any sort of when the owners are away? How long before you start to seriously be concerned about them not eating? And is there anything that you can do in preparation for you going away on holiday or business trip that would make this less of a problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I know a lot of cats can get sort of, distressed by changes in routine. I think if you're having a cat sitter come in, it might be worth having that cat sitter perhaps come in a couple of times whilst you're still there, just to act as a way of introduction to the cat. Eating and feeding cats is quite a complex topic as well. I spoke about the 10 to 12 small meals per day, and the fact that cats like to eat alone. They're solitary feeders. So providing the cat with food, for example, during the night when there aren't that many people around, we often see this in the clinic, actually. A lot of the time, you know, cats that come into the clinic that are perhaps a little bit shy of eating or don't want to eat, if we give them yummy food and leave it out for them during the night when everyone goes home and everything's dark and quiet, they'll often eat during the night. So that could be a good way of switching things around. Providing things that they love. So if they absolutely love wet food, you know, offer them more wet food in that time. But I guess as a general rule, you know, 2 to 3 days, I probably wouldn't leave it any longer than that. And again, you know, preparing your cat with things like the calm food, the Zilkine, the Feline spray before you go away. And if they're going into a cattery, providing a piece of their own bedding, so something that has their own smell on them. It doesn't have to be the owner's smell, it's their own smell that's important to them, so that they get that sense of security and comfort, because it's going to have all their pheromones on there.
Okay, brilliant. On that note, on the feeding note, I have heard a phrase that I've never heard before from one of my colleagues who's a veterinary nurse, and she was talking about whisker stress when it comes to selecting the bowl or the plate that you feed the cat on. And I know they don't like to, but I'd never heard of that term before, which I think is brilliant. What other common habits might we be doing that we're getting wrong in regards to the utensils that we use and the position that we feed them in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And whisker stress is a brilliant one. I've never heard it termed quite that way, but I've heard of it sort of referred to in lots of different ways. But if you have a look at the picture of my two cats here, so you can see how big the squidge's whiskers are there on the right, and you can see sort of that big diameter. Now, whiskers are extremely sensitive, and they give the cat a lot of information about its environment. So if a cat goes, puts its head down into a food bowl or a water bowl, we really want that food or water bowl to be wide enough and big enough for those whiskers to be able to spread out, so that they're not being kind of jammed in. The second thing about whiskers is, in relation to water, is whiskers help cats to kind of determine where the plane of water is. And that's why a lot of cats prefer drinking from moving water. So if you turn the tap on, or if you have a fountain, because they can more easily judge where that water level is going to be. And again, that's something, you know, that sensitive whiskers don't enjoy too much, is kind of, you know, getting dipped into water. So the wider, the better. We also have seen on occasion plastic food bowls can cause feline acne, perhaps. So using glass bowls or ceramic bowls or stainless steel bowls tends to be better. And then, of course, the way we feed them is really important. So rather feed 10 to 12 small meals per day, if you can somehow do that, than 1 or 2 large meals per day, because it's much more natural for them.
Do you find, on that note, the automated feeders would be a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And so automated feeders, but also feeders that are specific to the cat, so the microchip red feeders. So if you've got a multi-cat household, and you know, you've got one cat eating urinary food and another cat eating a different diet, those microchip feeder bowls can be really, really useful. But automated feeders, yeah, if you're out at work, you know, you could set an automated feeder up to sort of open up 2 or 3 times, however often it allows you to, whilst you're out throughout the day. So yeah, definitely, Hannah, that's a great suggestion.
Brilliant. Now, I have one from a family whose 7-year-old indoor cat, Mimi, is not really much of a lap cat and only allows some brushing and petting. She's a bit of the ultimate scaredy cat, really, and hides under the bed. We would like to introduce another kitten to our home, but are concerned how it would affect her. Should we even consider it? And what can we do to prepare her and to prepare the home before we consider bringing in a new cat or kitten?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Is that cat or kitten going to be okay, tolerate another cat in the home? It may not. You know, I think it's one of those things that, unfortunately, you probably won't know until you try. However, I think if Mimi is already quite an anxious cat and quite a scaredy cat, you know, and doesn't love social interactions, at least with people, I may err on the side of caution and say, you know, that she might be a cat that's best kept as an only cat, especially if she's, you know, already hiding away and not wanting to be terribly social. It could be that her social interactions with other cats are great and it's just humans that she finds scary, but we don't know. And I think I think we always have to think about the level of stress that a cat is already exposed to. So if you think about that as a bucket or a fuel tank, you know, how full is that bucket or that fuel tank already with stressors in that cat's life? And the fact that it doesn't love human interaction and that it's, you know, hiding away may mean that that cat's bucket is already quite full. And if we then add in another kitten, that might just cause that bucket to overflow, and we may then see behavior problems.
I think also what was very interesting about your talk, which I hadn't really realized, is how much earlier the socialization period is in kittens. Obviously, the first vaccination that we normally give to kittens, and often the first time they're presented to the veterinary clinic, is at 9 weeks or older. So particularly for, you know, responsible breeders, generally speaking, would have them vaccinated before they go into their home. So by the time, if you're purchasing your kitten from a breeder, you have the kitten home, that window is already closed. So it's another reason why it's extremely important to research, you know, if you're going for a particular breed or you're looking at a breeder, that you're researching what they're doing to, you know, optimize that socialization period as well, which is probably something I wouldn't have spoken to clients about before when they were considering doing that. So that was a eye opener. I have another question here regarding toys. Are there any toys in particular that you don't recommend? I think we've heard a lot of controversy over certain types of toys, so I'd like to have that corroborated by an expert.
Yeah, sure. I think so. Number one, don't play with your cats with your hands. That would be my first thing to say, because if you play with kittens with your hands a lot, that may induce sort of predatory related aggression as that kitten gets older. So that's the first thing. In terms of toys, they need to be safe, of course. And I know that there has been a lot of discussion about laser toys, laser pointers. And the discussion that has been had about that is, remember I spoke about that predatory sequence that's hardwired. So they go through this really set routine of, you know, seeing, stalking, pouncing, and then catching and then eating. And the problem with the laser pointer is that they can go through that sequence, but only to a certain point, because there's nothing to catch and there's nothing to pounce on and there's nothing to eat. So that final part of that hunting sequence isn't fulfilled, and that may cause frustration in some cats. So if you are using a laser pointer, and you know, I'm not against laser pointer toys because I know they're very stimulating for many cats, but then make sure that you always throw the cat a little toy mouse at the end. So when you finish playing with the laser pointer, throw a little toy mouse into the mix so that the cat can then pounce on the mouse and grab it and shake it and do whatever it wants to do with that laser pointer. So I think that's, you know, probably the most controversial toy, I guess, at the moment is laser pointer, yes or no. And I think there are a number of other toys as well, especially some of the automated, the electric toys, that we just have to be absolutely certain that they're very safe and that the cats can't kind of get trapped in anything that's kind of whirring around, paws can't get trapped in them, or, you know, that there are no pointy edges or things like that to the sort of more mechanical toys, if you like.
Perfect. I also have a sort of related question on exercise and playing. We have an indoor cat and she recently got outside. She now scratches at the door and meows to go back outside. Should we let her out? So that's sort of one question. And then the second question is, would you advise using a leash to take her outside?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first question is, would you let her outside? If it's safe to do so, absolutely. You know, it will be probably really enriching that cat's life. Now, there's always that discussion or debate about, if I let my cat out, I might be exposing it to risks. Yeah, absolutely. You might be exposing it to risks from other cats, fights from other cats, you know, to being hit by a car, all those things that we don't want. But the other side of that coin, or the other side of that debate, is by keeping the cat in, you might be exposing it to other risks, mental and emotional risks of not being able to meet its needs and not being able to fulfill you know, a normal sort of feline behavioral complex, if you like. So that would be the answer to the first question. A little bit controversial. If it were my cat, I probably would. Yeah, I'd let it out, knowing the risks. And the second part was, would I use a leash? So again, I used to be extremely against harnesses and leashes. I thought that they were, for cats, I thought that they, you know, were sort of quite inhibitory of the cat's personal freedom and personal space. And we all know how important that is to cats. So if you'd asked me that question a year ago, I would have probably said, no, I think it's an absolutely awful idea. I don't think, you know, harnesses and leads for cats are a good idea at all. However, I've seen a couple of cases recently where being able to safely take the cat outside, this was an apartment cat in particular that was not getting enough stimulation in the apartment environment. And that cat did go out on a harness and leash, and it massively enriched that cat's life. And that cat didn't seem to be too bothered about the physical restriction of wearing a harness and leash. I would say it's extremely individual. I would say probably for 90% of cats, I still don't love it, but there may be those odd cases where the cat tolerates that very well, and where it may add a different dimension to that cat's environment where it may be an idea.
Okay, brilliant. And I think this will need to be our last question, but I would ask anyone who's watching, if they've asked a question and we haven't got there, then what we might try and do is answer it on the Royal Canin UAE Instagram later. So we will get there. So the last question for now is the best way to approach an old cat that has been diagnosed with a chronic illness and needs to have more frequent visits to the vets. They're unavoidable, but he hates the entire process, the car journey, the waiting room, and obviously the veterinary examination, blood sampling and everything. Home visits won't always be possible or affordable. What can the owner do? Obviously there's lots of things that the veterinary clinic can do that you would already be implementing, but what can the owner do in particular to make it easier?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we do have a lot of cats that need to come to the clinic frequently. And as you said, even the car journey, getting them into the carrier, the car journey, all those things can be very stressful. I think a number of things at home. So number one is try and make the cat carrier as pleasant a place as possible. And there are some great videos on how to introduce your cat to a carrier. Now, if your cat has already formed a negative association to the carrier that you're currently using, you might need to ditch that and get a new carrier and build up a whole new set of positive associations. And I mentioned the Feline wipes earlier, so pheromone product wipes might be really useful. So just wiping out the inside of the carrier to make it feel more safe. You can use, usually you can use supplements such as Zilkine on an ongoing basis. So even older cats that may have medical issues, I don't think that there are any medical diagnoses that would counteract with Zilkine or that would prevent a cat from taking Zilkine. So having the cat on something that was that was an anxiolytic or a stress reliever sort of on a long-term basis would be really helpful. And then the thing that we have found the most helpful, certainly in our clinic, is pre-visit medications. So the one that we use the most is gabapentin, which is, again, a medication that's very safe to use, even in older cats, even in cats that have disease. And giving that an hour before the car journey tends to hugely improve that cat's experience. It acts as an anxiolytic, so it reduces anxiety, and it just takes away the whole stress of that whole journey and the experience at the clinic. So those would be my top things. But yeah, I think the cat carrier, feeding the cat treats in the cat carrier and really sort of familiarizing it with the cat carrier and the car journey would be really useful things as well.
Perfect. Lots to try there. I'm going to squeeze one more super quick question in because it's a brilliant one. When outdoor cats bring their owners a present, such as a baby bird or a mouse, is it really a present, and is it a sign of affection, or is that a bit of a myth?
It's a great question. And again, I've got a couple of answers for this. So I have experienced myself, one of my cats bringing me a real present. I had a horse riding accident a few years ago, and I had a bit of a sort of a bruised face, and I was at home for a couple of days feeling a little bit sorry for myself. And my cat at the time went out and brought home the biggest pigeon, and that is the only time in his whole life that he ever did that. He never did that before, and he never did that afterwards. So you can interpret that how you want, but I felt like he was bringing me a get better or feel better present at that time. If I'm thinking about it with my scientific head on and with my veterinary behavior head on, then we spoke about the territory and how cats would bring food back to their core territory, which for a lot of cats, of course, is their home. Then that would be the more scientific and the more I guess, from a veterinary point of view, the more correct answer. But, we can dream that they bring us the presents because they love us.
I prefer that answer, definitely. So I will stick to that. But thank you so much, Dr. Katrin, for your time. From everyone
My pleasure.
Health. And thank you to all the viewers that we've got and anyone who's going to listen. The recording will be there on our SV Animal Health YouTube, along with the first one that we did, the building blocks of canine behavior. So I urge anyone who is a first-time listener to go and have a look at the one that we recorded last month as well. And also a big thank you to Royal Canin UAE, who are the sponsors of the two webinars that we've done on canine and feline behavior. So a big thank you to them. And also we would urge you to follow them either on Instagram or Facebook at Royal Canin UAE for future events and future webinars that we will be planning. So